Marigold Lane was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, wrapped in the gentle hum of everyday life. It curved softly through a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a bustling city, lined with neat little houses painted in pastel shades. White picket fences bordered front yards bursting with roses, hydrangeas, and, of course, the tall sunflowers that gave the lane its name. The air was always tinged with the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with blooming lilacs and the faint aroma of wood smoke from chimneys. It was a place where neighbors knew each other's names, where children played hide-and-seek on warm summer evenings, and where the local mailman, Jim, made his rounds with a friendly whistle. On weekends, you could find groups gathered on porches, swapping recipes, gardening tips, or gossip about the town's minor dramas. The pace was slow and steady, almost like the street itself was breathing calmly. At the end of the lane stood a modest yellow cottage, its paint a bit weathered but charming. It belonged to Evelyn Harper, a woman who was part of the very fabric of Marigold Lane. Evelyn was in her late 30s, with soft chestnut hair often pulled back loosely, and warm hazel eyes that seemed to hold a quiet kindness. Every morning, she would walk her golden retriever, Sunny, down the street, exchanging greetings with anyone she passed. Evelyn was well loved in the neighborhood, known for her gentle demeanor and her love of storytelling. She worked at the city library, where she spent her days surrounded by books and history. To Evelyn, each book was a doorway into another world, a place where stories lived and breathed. On Saturdays, she often volunteered to read to children or help organize community book clubs. Despite her calm and composed exterior, Evelyn had a spark of curiosity that made her a seeker of stories, both in books and in life. This particular summer had been warm and dry, with bright sunshine flooding the street. The sunflowers in Evelyn's garden were reaching toward the sky, their golden heads nodding gently in the breeze. Neighbors admired them often. "They're the brightest on the whole lane," Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly widow who lived 2 houses down, remarked one morning as she leaned on her cane. Evelyn smiled, brushing dirt from her hands. "I think they thrive on a little extra sunlight and maybe a bit of talking." Mrs. Jenkins laughed softly, shaking her head. "Well, you do have a way with plants, dear. It's like you understand them." Their conversation was interrupted by the happy bark of Sunny, eager for his morning walk. Evelyn grabbed the leash and waved goodbye to Mrs. Jenkins before stepping out onto the sidewalk, the sun warm on her face. And so began another peaceful day on Marigold Lane, a day that would soon unravel into mystery. That morning, after her walk, Evelyn returned to her cozy cottage and brewed a cup of chamomile tea. The kitchen window overlooked the garden, where Sunny was already busy sniffing around the base of the sunflowers. Evelyn settled into her favorite armchair, a book resting on her lap, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She had an uneasy feeling, a whisper of something out of place, though nothing in Marigold Lane was ever truly out of place. Or so she thought. Her phone buzzed on the wooden table. It was a text from Sarah, her childhood friend and now a detective with the city police. The message was brief but urgent. "Can we meet? Something strange happened on Marigold." Evelyn's heart skipped. Strange? On their quiet street? She quickly typed back, "Of course." "When?" "An hour. Coffee shop downtown." Finishing her tea, she called Sunny inside and grabbed her jacket. As she locked the door, she noticed a small crowd gathering at the far end of the lane near the old willow tree. Curious, she walked toward them. Neighbors murmured in worried tones. Mrs. Jenkins stood near the crowd, eyes wide with concern. "Have you heard?" she whispered. "It's young Tommy. He's missing." Tommy was the 8-year-old boy who lived 2 doors down, a bright and lively child who loved climbing trees and catching frogs in the creek. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Missing? When was the last time anyone saw him? "Last night," said Mr. Patel, the hardware store owner. "His parents said he went to bed early, but when they checked this morning, gone." A chill ran down Evelyn's spine as she listened. The neighbors shared stories, strange noises heard overnight, footprints near the creek, and the eerie silence of a usually noisy street. Her mind raced. Could this really be happening here? A disappearance? Evelyn felt a mix of dread and determination. This wasn't just a story anymore, it was real, and it was unfolding right outside her door. The clock was ticking, and Evelyn knew that if Tommy wasn't found soon, the peaceful world of Marigold Lane would be shattered forever. The coffee shop downtown was bustling with the late morning rush, but Evelyn and Sarah found a quiet corner near the back. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries filled the air, a sharp contrast to the growing unease in Evelyn's chest. Sarah stirred her latte slowly, eyes dark and focused. They called me last night around midnight. Tommy's parents were frantic. The boy just vanished without a trace. Evelyn nodded, sipping her tea. Did they notice anything unusual? Any visitors? Sounds? Anything at all? Sarah sighed. Not much. They said Tommy was asleep by 8 p.m. No sign of forced entry. His window was locked, doors too. The only thing out of place was his bedroom light on in the morning, but he was nowhere to be found. Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. What about the neighbors? Did anyone see or hear anything? Sarah shook her head. A few neighbors heard noises around midnight, footsteps, maybe a car engine. But nothing concrete. It's like he disappeared into thin air. Evelyn's mind raced. What about the creek near the old willow tree? The neighbors mentioned footprints. Sarah nodded. We sent a team to check. They found muddy footprints, some broken twigs, but no sign of Tommy. The creek's shallow, but it's heavily wooded. It's a nightmare to search. As they talked, Evelyn's thoughts drifted to Tommy's family, his mother, Claire, a gentle woman who often brought cookies for the neighborhood kids, and his father, Mark, a quiet man who worked nights at the factory. How were they holding up? Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face grim. The team just called. They found something near the creek, a torn piece of fabric, bright red. Evelyn's breath caught. Tommy's favorite jacket. That's the one he wore yesterday. Sarah stood abruptly. We need to get back there. Now. Evelyn followed her outside into the crisp air, the sun casting long shadows over the town. As they drove back toward Marigold Lane, the reality hit hard. This was no ordinary disappearance. Something darker was at play, and every second counted. The air near the creek was thick with damp earth and the scent of pine needles. Evelyn and Sarah stepped carefully over the uneven ground, flashlight beams cutting through the growing dusk. The team of searchers had cordoned off the area, their faces grim under mud-streaked hats. Sarah crouched down, pointing to a bright red scrap tangled in the branches of a low bush. This has to be from Tommy's jacket. It's fresh, no dirt or mold. Evelyn knelt beside her, gently lifting the fabric. We need to send this to forensics immediately. If whoever took Tommy left this behind, they might have been in a hurry. One of the officers approached, holding a small plastic bag. We also found footprints heading away from the creek, 2 sets. One looks like a man's, heavy boots, the other smaller, maybe a child's or woman's shoe. Sarah frowned. Could Tommy have been with someone he knew? Or forced to walk alongside his kidnapper? Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. Either way, this isn't random. Someone wanted him gone, and fast. The searchers continued combing the woods, but the forest swallowed their shouts and footsteps, making the place seem eerily silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Evelyn's phone buzzed. It was a message from Claire, Tommy's mother. Please find my son. I don't know what I'll do if I don't see him again. Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat and typed back quickly, we're doing everything we can. We won't stop until we find him. Sarah pulled Evelyn aside. We need to look into Tommy's recent activities, his friends, school, anyone who might have had a grudge. Sometimes these things start with someone close. Evelyn nodded. I'll start by checking his social media, school records, and talk to his teacher. As night deepened, the searchlight beams flickered across the creek, but the creek held its secrets tight. Something about the stillness felt unnatural, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Suddenly, a shout broke the silence. Over here. We found something. The team rushed toward the voice, their hearts pounding. Beneath a thicket lay a small, worn backpack, Tommy's. Evelyn's hands trembled as she knelt to pick it up. Inside, a notebook filled with scribbles and drawings caught her eye. She flipped it open and read a chilling message scrawled in crayon. They are watching. Don't trust the dark. Evelyn's breath hitched as she stared at the cryptic message in Tommy's notebook. They are watching. Don't trust the dark. The childish handwriting twisted into shaky letters, as if the young boy had been scared to write it. She felt a pang of urgency unlike before. Sarah, Evelyn called softly, this might be a clue. Tommy was afraid of someone or something. Sarah nodded, eyes scanning the dense shadows of the woods beyond. We need to find out what the dark means to him. It could be a person, a place, or even a secret he stumbled on. Nearby, Detective Morales joined them, his face grim. We just got a call from the school. Tommy had been acting withdrawn lately. Teachers noticed he was jumpy, sometimes talking to himself, and once, he was found staring out the window, whispering about them watching. Evelyn exchanged a worried glance with Sarah. This is more than a simple disappearance. Something is going on beneath the surface. Back at the police station, Evelyn sat with Claire, Tommy's mother. The woman's face was drawn with exhaustion but her eyes shone with desperate hope. Tommy's never been in trouble, Claire said, clutching Evelyn's hand. But in the last few weeks, he changed. He said things that didn't make sense, about shadows following him, and hearing voices. Evelyn asked gently, did Tommy mention anyone specific? Someone new at school, or someone who made him uncomfortable? Claire shook her head. No. But last week, he came home with bruises on his arm. When I asked, he said he fell. But I don't believe him. Evelyn's mind raced. Bruises. Fear. Cryptic notes. We'll do everything we can to find him, Claire. And I need you to think, anything unusual, anything at all, no matter how small. That night, Evelyn scoured Tommy's social media, combing through posts, messages, and comments. A pattern emerged. Cryptic chats with a username, Shadowfox, who seemed to be encouraging Tommy to reveal the truth. She printed the conversation. Shadowfox, don't be afraid. They can't hurt you if you speak up. Tommy, they're everywhere. Watching. Shadowfox, meet me at the old mill at midnight. I'll keep you safe. Evelyn's pulse quickened. The old mill was an abandoned place on the edge of town, long rumored to be haunted. She called Sarah. We need to check out the mill tonight. This Shadowfox could be key. Sarah's voice was steady but tense. I'm on my way. Outside, the wind whispered through the empty streets, carrying secrets that had waited too long to be heard. The moon hung low and silver as Evelyn and Sarah crept along the cracked path leading to the old mill. Its skeletal frame loomed against the night sky, windows shattered, and paint peeling like the faded memories of the town's forgotten past. The air was thick with dampness and the scent of rotting wood. This place gives me the creeps, Sarah whispered, pulling her jacket tighter. Evelyn nodded, eyes sharp, flashlight scanning the shadows. If Tommy met someone here, this is where we'll find clues. As they approached the mill's rusted door, a sudden noise made them freeze, a low scraping sound from inside, like metal against stone. Did you hear that? Sarah asked, voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Evelyn replied, heart pounding. Stay close. They pushed the door open, its hinges creaking like a ghost's sigh. Inside, darkness swallowed them whole, their flashlight beams slicing through thick dust and cobwebs. Suddenly, a figure darted between the broken beams, a young boy. Evelyn gasped. "Tommy." He stopped, wide-eyed, trembling. "You found me," he whispered. Relief flooded Evelyn's chest as she stepped forward. "Tommy, what happened? Why were you here?" Tommy's voice was barely audible. "Shadowfox said it was safe. But then, the Watchers came." "The Watchers?" Sarah pressed gently. Tommy nodded. "They wear dark coats. They follow me everywhere. At school, at home, even here." His small hands shook as he spoke. Evelyn's mind raced. "Who are they, Tommy? What do they want?" Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. But they said if I told, they'd take my family." Before Evelyn could respond, a sudden sound echoed from behind, footsteps, heavy and slow. "Hide!" Evelyn hissed, pulling Tommy and Sarah into the shadows. A shadowy figure appeared in the doorway, tall, imposing, face obscured by a hood. "You shouldn't be here," the figure growled. Evelyn held her breath, gripping Tommy's hand. "We're looking for the truth," she said steadily. The figure paused, then disappeared into the night. Sarah exhaled shakily. "We need to get out, now." As they fled the mill, Evelyn's resolve hardened. This wasn't just a missing child case, it was something far darker, and time was running out. Back in Evelyn's cluttered office, the trio sat around the old oak desk. The faint hum of the ceiling fan and the ticking clock filled the heavy silence. Tommy clutched a worn teddy bear, his small frame tense but safe for now. Evelyn pulled out a worn notebook, flipping through pages filled with scribbles, newspaper clippings, and hastily drawn maps. "Tommy, tell me more about these Watchers. When did they start following you?" Tommy swallowed hard. Since the school play last month. They were in the audience, but no one else could see them. Only me." Sarah leaned forward, eyes sharp. "What did they look like? Did they say anything to you?" Tommy's lip trembled. "Just whispers. Don't tell. Stay quiet." "But sometimes they left marks on the walls, strange symbols." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She'd seen symbols like that before, in old folklore books referencing secret societies, groups that operated in shadows, manipulating events from behind the scenes. "Tommy, you're very brave," Evelyn said softly. "We'll protect you. But we need to know everything." Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the tense calm. She glanced at the screen, a text from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or more will disappear." Evelyn felt a chill crawl up her spine. "This is bigger than we thought." Determined, she opened her laptop and began cross-referencing the symbols Tommy described with local historical records. As the clock ticked past midnight, a name kept appearing: the Black Veil Society, a secretive organization rumored to have influenced the town's affairs for over a century. "This society is real," Evelyn muttered. "And it's tied to the disappearances." Sarah rubbed her temples. "We need help. If they're watching Tommy, they're watching us too." Evelyn nodded grimly. "Tomorrow, we visit an old historian. If anyone knows about the Black Veil Society, it's him." Tommy looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Will it be safe?" Evelyn smiled reassuringly. "We're going to do everything we can." As dawn crept in, the shadows outside seemed to thicken, as if warning them, the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the truth would become. The morning sun poured weakly through the dusty windows of the town's historical society. Evelyn, Sarah, and Tommy stood nervously before the aged mahogany door, engraved with intricate patterns that seemed oddly familiar. Evelyn pushed it open, and the scent of old paper and polished wood greeted them. Inside, the room was lined with towering shelves crammed with leather-bound tomes, yellowed newspapers, and brittle maps. At a large desk sat Harold Winslow, the town's unofficial historian. His silver hair was combed neatly, but his eyes betrayed decades of witnessing secrets better left buried. "Evelyn," he greeted, voice rasping yet steady. "I've heard whispers you're poking around old shadows. Dangerous business." "We need to know about the Black Veil Society," Evelyn said firmly. "And the disappearances on Marigold Lane." Harold's face darkened. "The Black Veil? A cursed legacy. Not just stories for children. They say it started in the late 1800s. A secret brotherhood controlling the town's fate. They watch. They punish. They don't forgive." Sarah leaned in. "Why haven't the police done more?" Harold sighed. "Because the veil is thick. They've infiltrated every corner. The chief himself once whispered warnings to me, 'Don't touch it, or you'll vanish too.'" Tommy, clutching his teddy bear, asked, "Have they ever hurt kids?" Harold looked away, his voice barely a whisper. "More than once. And always silence after. Families vanish, records disappear. Those children never truly existed." Evelyn's heart pounded. "We need proof. Anything that can expose them." Harold reached under his desk, pulling out a faded, leather-bound journal. "This belonged to my great-grandfather. He tried to expose them. He wrote about meetings, symbols, rituals. But he disappeared a month after this was found." The three of them leaned over the fragile pages. Drawings of masks, strange symbols, coded messages filled the pages. One passage chilled them all. "The veil is not just cloth, but a curse. Those who see behind it pay the price. Beware the watcher in the shadows." Sarah swallowed hard. "We're dealing with something old, powerful, and deadly." Evelyn closed the journal slowly. "Then we have to be smarter. We gather evidence carefully. No more direct confrontations." Tommy's voice was small but determined. "I want to help. I don't want anyone else to disappear." Harold nodded gravely. "Then we must act quickly. The veil is thinning. And the watchers are restless." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling dead leaves like whispers warning them to stop, but their resolve only grew stronger. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. A thick fog rolled over Marigold Lane, swallowing the streetlights in a grey haze. Evelyn sat by her bedroom window, the journal laid open on her lap. Every line seemed to whisper warnings, every symbol a riddle wrapped in darkness. Suddenly, a faint tapping sound echoed from outside. She froze, heart pounding. Peering through the curtains, she saw nothing but the shifting fog. Then, a shadow darted between the trees lining the street. Grabbing her phone, Evelyn texted Sarah and Tommy to stay alert. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. Sarah reported strange footsteps outside her house, and Tommy said he heard whispers near his bedroom window. Evelyn grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, the cold biting at her skin. The fog twisted and danced, distorting shapes. She followed the sound of the footsteps, each crunch on the gravel sharper in the silence. Suddenly, she spotted a figure in the distance. Tall, cloaked, face hidden beneath a dark hood. The figure paused, as if sensing her gaze, then vanished behind a hedge. "Who's there?" Evelyn called, voice trembling but loud. No answer. Her mind raced. Could it be a member of the Black Veil Society? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Back inside, she double-locked her door and sat down, trying to steady her breathing. She stared at the journal and realized, the watchers weren't just legends, they were watching her. Meanwhile, Sarah sat in her room, the shadows playing tricks on her eyes. Her window rattled softly, and she swore she heard whispered words, indistinct, but urgent. She pulled the curtains shut and switched on every light, trying to dispel the creeping dread. Tommy, clutching his teddy bear tightly, hid under his blanket as faint scratching sounds came from outside. It's just the wind, he told himself over and over, but the fear was real. The night stretched on, thick with unease. As dawn neared, the trio knew this was no longer just a mystery, it was a battle against an unseen, relentless force. Dawn crept slowly over Marigold Lane, casting pale light through the lingering fog. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee untouched before her, eyes glued to the journal's worn pages. The night's encounter haunted her, an unseen presence, silent but unmistakably there. She ran her fingers over the cryptic symbols again, searching for answers. Her phone buzzed, a message from Sarah, "Something's wrong. Found this in my backyard." Attached was a blurry photo of a small, weathered locket half buried in the dirt. Evelyn's stomach churned. That locket was identical to the one described in the journal, the key of veils, rumored to reveal hidden truths if opened by the right person. She called Sarah immediately. "Where exactly did you find it?" "Right beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the yard," Sarah whispered, voice shaky. I think someone was watching me." Evelyn's mind raced. "Don't touch anything else. I'm coming over." When she arrived, Sarah led her through the dew-soaked grass to the oak tree, its gnarled branches stretching like fingers toward the sky. The locket lay open on the ground, revealing a faded photograph inside, a young woman with eyes eerily familiar. "This looks like," Evelyn trailed off, heart pounding. The woman in the photo bore a striking resemblance to her own grandmother. Suddenly, Sarah gasped. From behind the tree, Tommy appeared, holding a folded piece of paper. "I found this near the garden shed." Evelyn unfolded the note, the edges stained and brittle. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "They come for the curious. Trust no one. The truth lies beneath the water." Questions spun wildly in Evelyn's head. Who was they? What water? And how did her grandmother fit into all this? The trio agreed they needed to visit the old town archives. If the past held secrets, they'd find them there. But as they prepared to leave, Evelyn glanced back at the oak tree. The fog was rising again, curling around the roots like ghostly fingers, as if warning them to stop digging deeper. The town archives sat nestled between the aging courthouse and the weathered library, a forgotten building with cracked windows and a heavy wooden door that creaked as Evelyn pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the slanting sunlight streaming through stained glass, casting fragmented colors across rows of ancient files and brittle newspapers. Inside, the scent of old paper and leather-bound ledgers filled the air. Evelyn, Sarah, and Tommy exchanged wary glances, each feeling the weight of unseen eyes from decades past. Evelyn approached the long counter where an elderly librarian, Ms. Harrow, looked up from her knitting. Her sharp eyes softened as she recognized Evelyn. "Back again, dear. Looking for something particular?" Evelyn nodded, pulling out the worn journal and the photo from the locket. "I'm trying to learn more about this woman." She handed the photo across. Ms. Harrow's fingers trembled as she studied it. "Ah. That's Margaret Sinclair." A name whispered in Marigold Lane's darker stories. Her voice lowered. "She disappeared nearly 70 years ago, just like the legends say. Some say she was involved in things unnatural." Tommy scoffed lightly, but Evelyn's gaze remained fixed. "Do you have any records on what happened to her?" The librarian led them to a secluded corner stacked with yellowed newspapers and handwritten case files. Margaret was a local artist. Beautiful, talented, but strange. She was obsessed with the supernatural, particularly the lake by the old mill. People said she was trying to uncover its secrets. Sarah pulled a brittle newspaper clipping, "Local artist vanishes after mysterious encounter at lake." The article recounted how Margaret was last seen walking toward the lake under the full moon, clutching a similar locket. Evelyn's breath hitched. The lake, the note, the warnings, it all pointed here. Ms. Harrow paused, her voice barely above a whisper. There's a legend about the Veil of Waters, a boundary between worlds, said to be guarded by those who vanished without a trace. Some say Margaret tried to cross it, but was pulled beneath, lost forever. A sudden creak echoed from the back room. Tommy's eyes darted toward the sound. Did you hear that? Evelyn's pulse quickened. The archives suddenly felt colder, the walls closing in. As they gathered the files, a chilling thought settled over them: the past wasn't done reaching out. Outside, the sky darkened with rolling clouds, shadows stretching longer over Marigold Lane. The chill in the archives lingered as the trio stepped back onto the cracked sidewalk, the heavy sky threatening rain. Evelyn clutched the papers tightly, the weight of decades-old secrets pressing on her chest. "Veil of Waters," Tommy muttered, shaking his head. "Sounds like something out of a horror movie." "But legends often have a grain of truth," Evelyn replied. "Especially when tied to real disappearances." Sarah looked uneasy, glancing toward the lake visible in the distance. So, Margaret was obsessed with the lake and then vanished. Did anyone ever find her? "No," Evelyn answered. "At least, not physically. But the stories say strange lights and whispers come from the water on moonlit nights. Some locals won't even go near it after dark." Tommy laughed nervously. "Great. We're investigating ghost stories now." They made their way toward the lake, the path lined with overgrown weeds and broken branches. The water lay still, reflecting the gloomy sky, its surface eerily smooth like glass. Evelyn pulled out the locket, holding it up. The tiny photo inside seemed to shimmer faintly in the fading light. "Do you think this locket could be the key?" she asked. Sarah frowned. If Margaret was trying to cross some boundary, maybe it was more than just superstition. Tommy squinted toward the edge of the water, where dark shapes stirred beneath the surface. "Look!" Ripples formed, and a faint glow pulsed just beneath the waterline. The air grew colder, and a low hum filled the silence. Suddenly, the wind picked up, carrying whispers, soft, unintelligible but hauntingly close. Evelyn's heart pounded. This isn't just a legend. Something is here. Something connected to Margaret. A shadow flickered at the water's edge. Sarah gasped as a pale hand emerged briefly, then vanished again. Tommy took a step back, voice shaking. "Maybe we should leave." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "We need to know what happened. Why Margaret disappeared, and why she left this locket behind." As darkness crept over the lake, their investigation crossed into a world where reality and myth blurred, where the past wasn't just history, but a living, breathing enigma waiting to be uncovered. The night swallowed the fading light, and the trio huddled near the water's edge, their breaths forming quick puffs in the cold air. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she held the locket close to her chest, its weight grounding her amid the growing unease. "The whispers, what do you think they mean?" Sarah asked, voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But legends like these often warn of boundaries, between worlds, between life and death. Maybe Margaret tried to cross that boundary." Tommy, still uneasy, stared at the lake's surface. "Or maybe whatever's out there took her." A sudden splash startled them, and ripples cascaded outward. From the water's depths, a faint silhouette emerged, vague and shifting like a reflection in a disturbed mirror. "Did you see that?" Sarah gasped, clutching Evelyn's arm. "I did," Evelyn whispered. "And I think it's trying to communicate." The hum grew louder, resonating in their chests like a low pulse. The locket glowed faintly now, its small photo shimmering as if alive. "Margaret's story isn't over," Evelyn said, her voice firm despite the fear creeping in. "She left a part of herself here, and it's reaching out." Suddenly, Tommy's phone buzzed loudly, breaking the spell. He fumbled to silence it, but the moment was broken. The lake's surface returned to its eerie stillness, the shadow vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "We need answers," Sarah said, her eyes wide. "Not just about Margaret, but about this place. Evelyn nodded. Tomorrow, we'll visit the town historian. If there's anyone who knows more about the Veil of Waters, it's him. As they retreated from the lake, the whispers faded but did not disappear entirely, leaving a haunting promise that the night's mystery was far from over. The next morning, Evelyn, Sarah, and Tommy found themselves walking briskly toward the town's historical society building, a quaint, brick structure nestled between a dusty bookstore and a coffee shop. The sun cast long shadows as the chill of dawn lingered in the air. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood. Rows of shelves held volumes thick with dust, each a testament to the town's long and tangled history. At the back of the room sat an elderly man behind a cluttered desk, his silver hair and sharp eyes giving him an air of quiet authority. "Good morning," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "We're here about Margaret and the stories surrounding Marigold Lane." The historian peered up, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Ah, Margaret, the tale that refuses to rest. I'm Arthur Langley. What would you like to know?" Sarah spoke first. "We heard about the Veil of Waters, the strange whispers at the lake, the disappearances. Is there more to it than just folklore?" Arthur nodded slowly. "More than most realize. The veil is a thin boundary between our world and something else, something ancient. The lake is said to be a crossing point. For centuries, people have vanished here under mysterious circumstances." Tommy leaned in, voice low. "But why Margaret? Why now?" Arthur shuffled some papers and pulled out a brittle journal, its pages yellowed with age. Margaret was obsessed with the lake secrets. She believed the veil was weakening, that the boundary between worlds was fraying. She wanted to understand what lay beyond, what caused the disappearances. Evelyn reached out to touch the journal. "Did she write about the whispers?" Arthur's gaze darkened. "Yes, and more. She described voices calling, visions of shadows moving just beneath the surface. She warned of a force that feeds on human fear and regret. It grows stronger with every lost soul." Sarah swallowed hard. "Is there a way to stop it?" The historian sighed deeply. "That's the question no one has answered. Some believe an old ritual could reinforce the veil. Others say it's inevitable, that the veil will collapse and the lake will claim more." Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. "We need to find that ritual." Arthur looked at them intently. "Be careful. Some doors are best left closed." The trio exchanged determined glances. The mystery was deeper and darker than they had imagined, and their search for the truth was only beginning. Leaving the historical society, the weight of Arthur's words settled heavily on Evelyn, Sarah, and Tommy. The quaint town street seemed quieter, almost too still, as if the shadows themselves were listening. The air was thick with unspoken secrets. "We need to find more about this ritual," Evelyn said firmly. Arthur mentioned it but didn't elaborate. "Maybe the journal has clues." Back at their makeshift base, Tommy's cluttered apartment, they spread the brittle pages across the wooden table. Margaret's handwriting danced in spidery strokes, filled with strange symbols and cryptic notes. Sarah traced a series of drawings depicting ancient runes and a circle of stones by the lake. "It looks like a protection circle," Tommy observed, adjusting his glasses. "Maybe if we can recreate this, it could strengthen the veil." Evelyn pointed to a passage, "Light in the darkness, water's embrace. Call to the lost, hold back the space." She must have been describing a chant or incantation. Sarah's phone buzzed, breaking the silence. A message from an unknown number appeared, "Stop digging. Some truths drown in silence." Their hearts pounded. Someone was watching them. "Do you think this is from the town?" Tommy asked. "Could be. Or worse, someone who knows more about the lake than they let on," Evelyn replied. The team realized that uncovering the ritual meant stepping deeper into danger. They agreed to visit the lake at dusk, when the veil was said to be thinnest. As night fell, the trio stood by the still water, the moon casting eerie reflections. Tommy set up a small recorder to capture any unusual sounds. Evelyn began to read aloud the chant from the journal, her voice steady despite the cold. For a moment, only the rustling wind answered. Then, faint whispers echoed across the water, chilling and sorrowful. Suddenly, a shadow shifted beneath the surface, rippling like smoke. Sarah gasped, clutching Evelyn's arm. "Did you see that?" she whispered. The water trembled as the whispers grew louder, almost pleading. Evelyn stopped chanting. "It's responding." The shadow disappeared, but the lake's surface remained disturbed, like a breath held just beneath calm waters. "We're not alone," Tommy said, voice tense. "And whatever's here knows we're trying to fight back." The night was far from over. The veil had taken notice, and it was watching them. The trio stood frozen by the lake, the weight of what they'd just witnessed pressing down on them like a heavy fog. The ripples on the water faded into stillness, but the eerie feeling lingered. Sarah broke the silence. "We need to record everything. If the veil is reacting, we can't ignore it. Maybe it wants something." Tommy fiddled nervously with his phone. "I've been looking into the town's old police reports. There are strange disappearances near the lake over the decades, but they were all dismissed as accidents or runaways. What if they weren't?" Evelyn frowned. "If the ritual Margaret mentioned is the key to keeping the veil strong, maybe those disappearances were because the ritual was broken, or incomplete. They made a pact to return to the Historical Society the next morning to dig deeper into town archives. But first, they needed rest, though none of them felt safe to sleep." That night, Evelyn was haunted by dreams. Fragmented images of a woman in tattered clothes standing at the lake's edge, eyes pleading, hands outstretched toward her. A whisper echoed in her mind, "Find me, before the darkness claims us all." Morning brought a grim determination. The town library was their next destination. Rows of dust-laden books and faded newspaper clippings whispered of a time when Marigold Lane was bustling, its lake a place of celebration and secrets. In the archives, they uncovered a fragile letter from Margaret addressed to a "dear friend," describing her fears that something ancient beneath the lake was stirring. She wrote about a forbidden pact made long ago and the consequences of breaking it. Tommy read aloud a passage, "The lake demands balance. When forgotten, it takes what is owed. Only through the circle of light and water can the debt be repaid." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a cold breeze swept through the room despite the sealed windows. Evelyn's heart raced. Someone, or something, was warning them to stop. But their curiosity burned brighter than fear. "We're closer than ever," Evelyn said. "We just have to figure out how to complete the ritual before more people vanish." As they packed up the documents, a figure watched from the shadows beyond the stacks, eyes glinting with secrets and silent menace. The game was far from over. The veil's grip tightened, and time was running out. The discovery at the library had ignited a spark within the trio, but it also cast a deeper shadow over their investigation. Armed with Margaret's letter and a few ancient tomes describing the ritual, they returned to Marigold Lane with a sense of urgency. Back at Evelyn's house, they spread out their findings across the dining table. The text described the ritual as a circle of light and water, a ceremony conducted by the original settlers to maintain the veil, a barrier between the natural and the supernatural that protected the town from the lake's dark forces. Tommy traced the passage with his finger. "It says the circle needs 7 participants, each representing an element: earth, air, fire, water, light, shadow, and spirit. They must gather at the lake's edge at the stroke of midnight during the new moon." Evelyn glanced at the calendar. "The new moon is in 3 nights. Sarah leaned forward, eyes sharp. "But where do we find the other participants? We're only 3. The answer came swiftly, almost as if conjured by the air itself. A soft knock at the door startled them. They opened it to find an elderly man, his face weathered like the pages of an ancient book. He introduced himself as Elias, a lifelong resident and unofficial historian of Marigold Lane. "I heard you're trying to fix what was broken," Elias said quietly. "I've kept the old ways alive. The ritual is not just ceremony, it's a bond, a promise we all must keep. But it's dangerous. You must be sure you're willing to risk everything." Elias carried with him a small, worn box containing relics said to represent the 7 elements: stones, feathers, candles, and more, each imbued with significance. The group listened as Elias recounted stories passed down for generations, about the lake's wrath when balance faltered, and the sacrifices made to keep darkness at bay. The night of the new moon arrived. Evelyn, Tommy, Sarah, and Elias, along with 4 others who'd answered the call. A firefighter, a schoolteacher, a local artist, and a nurse, gathered by the lake, each holding their symbol. The air was thick with tension. Shadows danced under the pale moonlight as the group formed a circle, hands clasped, voices murmuring the incantations from the old manuscripts. Suddenly, the water rippled violently. A chilling wind swept through, carrying with it faint whispers and an eerie glow beneath the surface. Evelyn's voice wavered, but she pressed on. The ritual demanded total focus, unity. A figure emerged from the mist, translucent, sorrowful, a woman in tattered clothes. It was the same apparition Evelyn had seen in her dreams. The spirit spoke, voice like a fragile breeze, "Thank you. You remember." The veil shimmered, the lake stilled. For a moment, peace settled. But the question remained, was this truly the end, or just the beginning of a darker tale? The days following Emily's disappearance felt like a nightmare that the town couldn't wake up from. The once lively streets of Millfield were now filled with anxious whispers and concerned glances. At the police station, Detective Martin and his team worked relentlessly, sifting through mountains of evidence and following every lead, no matter how small. Martin sat at his cluttered desk late one evening, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The case files were sprawled before him, photographs of Emily's smiling face, maps marked with locations she frequented, and the cryptic notes from the anonymous call. A sudden knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Officer Linda Hayes, holding a small, sealed envelope. "Detective, this just came in from an informant. Says it might be related to Emily's case." Martin took the envelope cautiously, his fingers trembling slightly. He slid open the seal and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "Look where the river bends near the old mill. There you'll find what you seek. But beware, the truth isn't always kind." His heart pounded. The old mill had been abandoned for decades, a place steeped in local legends and eerie stories. Most parents warned their children to stay away. If this clue was genuine, it could be the break they desperately needed. He called his partner, Detective Harris, and within minutes, they were driving through the winding roads toward the mill. The night was thick with fog, and the headlights barely pierced the darkness. As they approached, the silhouette of the mill loomed, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching their every move. "Ready?" Harris asked, his voice steady but low. Martin nodded, gripping his flashlight tightly. They stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots echoing unnervingly. At the river bend, Martin's light caught on something. A small, rusted tin box partially buried under a pile of leaves. He crouched and carefully pried it open. Inside was a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon and a small locket. As he examined the letters, Martin felt a chill. The letters were from someone named L, written in a desperate tone, speaking of secrets and betrayals that reached far beyond Emily's disappearance. The locket contained a tiny photograph of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Emily. "What do you make of this?" Harris asked, his eyes scanning the letters. Martin swallowed hard. "This isn't just about Emily. This goes deeper, much deeper." Detective Martin and Harris returned to the precinct with the bundle of letters and the locket. As they began to analyze the contents, they noticed a recurring signature at the bottom of several pages, L. Whitmore. Whitmore? That name sounds familiar, Harris murmured. Martin's brow furrowed. Councilwoman Lillian Whitmore. She's been on the town council for over 30 years. A background check confirmed it. Lillian Whitmore came from one of the founding families of Millfield. The letters weren't just love notes or cryptic musings, they were confessions. They spoke of a young girl hidden away, references to a child born in secrecy, and suggestions that this child might have grown up without ever knowing her true heritage. Martin's voice was tense. What if Emily wasn't just some random girl? What if she's connected to this family somehow? They scheduled an interview with Lillian under the pretext of a community welfare check. When confronted with the letters, her reaction was unexpected. She didn't deny their authenticity, instead, her face drained of color. I never wanted this to come to light, she whispered. It was all so long ago. I had a daughter, illegitimate. I gave her up. I was told she died shortly after. Martin held up the locket. This picture, does she look familiar? Lillian's eyes welled up. She nodded slowly. That's her. That's my daughter. And if she had a child, then Emily. A wave of realization passed through the room. The mystery had just deepened. Emily was part of Millfield's most powerful bloodline, and someone had gone to great lengths to keep it buried. Word of the connection between Emily and the Whitmore family leaked to the press. Headlines like "Heiress Vanished" and "Secrets of the Whitmore Legacy" stirred public frenzy. Protesters gathered outside the Whitmore estate, demanding answers. Martin received an anonymous envelope containing surveillance footage from a gas station near the lake. In it, a dark SUV matching the one owned by Gerald Whitmore, Lillian's estranged brother, was seen around the time Emily disappeared. Looks like the whole Whitmore family has skeletons, Harris remarked. They paid Gerald a visit. The man was defensive, jittery. His lawyer intervened quickly, citing a lack of warrant and refusing any cooperation. But the footage was enough to convince a judge. A warrant was issued, and within hours, police combed through Gerald's estate. In a shed behind the property, they found torn remnants of a scarf matching one Emily was last seen wearing. Martin looked at the evidence bag, hands clenched. He's hiding something. Maybe everything. They brought Gerald in for questioning. Under pressure, he cracked. She came to me. Said she knew who she was. Said she wanted to expose it all. I panicked. I didn't mean to hurt her. Martin's voice was cold. Where is she, Gerald? Gerald hesitated. I left her at the cabin. The one by Black Pine Creek. The race to find her, alive or not, had begun. The cabin by Black Pine Creek had been abandoned for years. Overgrown brush clawed at the edges of a weather-beaten porch, and the windows were clouded with grime. The late afternoon sun filtered through thick pines, casting eerie shadows as Detective Martin and Harris pulled up in their unmarked cruiser. Martin gripped the wheel tightly. Let's hope to God she's still alive. They approached the door cautiously, weapons drawn. The wood groaned under their weight. Martin knocked once, twice. No response. Harris gave him a nod, and Martin kicked in the door. The musty smell of mildew and rotting timber hit them instantly. The interior was dark, save for thin slits of light seeping through the boarded-up windows. Clear left, Harris called out, sweeping through what used to be a living room. Martin checked the kitchen, empty. Then, from the back of the house, a muffled sound. It was faint. Like a moan, or a cry. Back here. Martin yelled, his voice sharp. They burst into a small room at the end of the hallway. And there she was, Emily. Bound to a chair, wrists raw and eyes wide with terror. A cloth gag muffled her cries. Martin rushed to her, quickly cutting the rope. Emily, you're safe now. We've got you. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she collapsed into his arms. Harris covered the perimeter, radioing for medical backup. I thought no one would find me, Emily whispered hoarsely. You're okay, Martin said gently. You're safe now. They wrapped her in a thermal blanket and helped her into the cruiser. As they pulled away, sirens from the incoming medics echoed through the trees. Back at the station, Emily recounted her story. How she had learned about her bloodline, how she had contacted Gerald Whitmore demanding answers. How he lured her under the pretense of revealing more, only to knock her unconscious and drive her to the cabin. He said people wouldn't understand. That if the truth came out, it would ruin everything, she told them. He was trying to protect the legacy, but he didn't care about me. Martin nodded grimly. That legacy ends now. Emily remained under medical supervision for the next 24 hours, recovering from dehydration, bruises, and emotional trauma. Though shaken, her will was unbroken. On the second morning, she sat across from Martin and Harris in the precinct interview room, her voice stronger. I want the truth out, she said firmly. All of it. About the Whitmores, the cover-ups, everything. Martin nodded. We're with you. But this goes deep, Emily. If we're going to expose them, we need your help to tie all the pieces together. Emily leaned forward. I'll tell you everything I found. She had been piecing things together for months. As she investigated her past, she discovered discrepancies in adoption records, vague notations in hospital archives, and eventually, an anonymous letter from someone claiming to know her origins. That letter led her to Lillian Whitmore, though she never managed to speak to her directly. I think Gerald intercepted the letter. That's how he knew I was digging, Emily said. Meanwhile, Martin and Harris worked to corroborate her story. A forensic team returned to the cabin, uncovering a burner phone, a roll of duct tape, and Emily's fingerprints on several surfaces, proving she had been held there. The DA was briefed, and arrest warrants for Gerald were reissued, this time with stronger charges: attempted murder, unlawful confinement, and obstruction of justice. The story was already making waves in the media. News anchors referred to it as the Millfield heiress scandal. But Gerald had vanished. He knew the walls were closing in, Harris muttered as they stared at the empty mansion, now guarded by 2 squad cars. He's on the run. Interpol and national agencies were alerted. Martin suspected he had help, someone on the inside who tipped him off. As they combed through security footage and electronic transactions, one name surfaced again and again. Councilwoman Lillian Whitmore. Councilwoman Lillian Whitmore sat in her expansive study, hands trembling as she held her teacup. Her home, once a symbol of grace and power, now felt like a fortress under siege. Outside, news vans lined the streets, and protesters gathered, chanting Emily's name. Martin and Harris arrived with a court summons in hand. I trusted you, Martin said as he entered the room. But you knew. You knew Gerald was going to hurt her. Lillian set her cup down. I didn't know he'd go that far. I only warned him that someone might be uncovering the past. I thought he'd shut it down, maybe pay her off, intimidate her. I didn't know he'd kidnap her. Harris's jaw clenched. You thought silence was worth more than her life. Lillian looked away, her voice cracking. I've spent my whole life maintaining this family's image. You don't understand the weight of that responsibility. My father, my grandfather. They all kept secrets. I thought I could handle one more. Well, now it's public, Martin said. And you're going to help us bring him in. Lillian hesitated. He'll never come back here. He has a property, an old retreat house in Canada. He mentioned it years ago, said it was his emergency plan. He called it Waverly Pines. The detectives immediately contacted Border Security and Interpol. Within hours, they received word, a man matching Gerald's description had crossed into Ontario using forged documents. Emily was briefed, and her resolve only strengthened. "If he runs, fine," she said. "But we'll chase him. And I'll speak out. I'll tell the world everything he tried to bury." She gave her first televised interview that evening, seated calmly beneath studio lights. The interviewer leaned in. "What do you want now, Emily?" "I want justice. Not just for me, for everyone silenced by people like him. And I want to be free of their name." The world was watching now. And the final chapter was beginning to unfold. A cold front swept across Ontario as Interpol agents tracked Gerald Whitmore's movements near the outskirts of Muskoka, a remote region lined with dense woods and icy lakes. The Waverley Pines retreat, nestled deep in the wilderness, had been off the grid for years, no official ownership records, no taxes, no utilities. But a thermal drone sweep revealed recent heat signatures near the property. Martin and Harris were flown in as part of a coordinated task force. They arrived just before dawn, armed with a warrant and the knowledge that Gerald might be desperate, maybe even armed. "Stay alert," Martin warned. "Cornered animals don't surrender quietly." They approached the cabin from opposite sides. Snow muffled their footsteps. Harris signaled when he spotted faint light flickering through the curtains. A fire was burning inside. With a loud bang, the team burst through the door. Hands in the air. "Gerald Whitmore, you're under arrest." Inside, Gerald looked thinner, almost hollow. He raised his hands but didn't resist. Instead, he smirked. So the princess found her way back to the throne. Martin stepped forward. "You're done hiding. Emily survived, Gerald. You lost." As officers cuffed him, Gerald didn't fight. He only stared out the frosted window, the fire crackling behind him. Back in Millfield, news of the arrest exploded across every media outlet. Headlines read: "Fugitive heir captured in Canadian hideout. Emily Whitmore, from unknown to unbreakable." Emily watched the press conference from the precinct. Her eyes welled with tears, not of grief, but of closure. Martin stood beside her. "You did it," he said gently. "You faced them all." "I didn't do it alone," she replied. Lillian, meanwhile, had resigned from the council and issued a public apology. Charges were pending, but her cooperation had earned her leniency. As Gerald was extradited back to the U.S., the courtroom began preparations for a high-profile trial. One that promised to shake the very foundations of Millfield's legacy. And Emily? She wasn't done yet. The courthouse was swarmed. Journalists, protesters, and curious locals gathered daily as the State versus Gerald Whitmore trial began. Emily, now the face of the investigation, walked into the courtroom flanked by security and media flashes. She wore a navy blue suit, understated but sharp, her presence confident and unwavering. The prosecution began with a powerful opening. Gerald Whitmore didn't just try to erase history, he kidnapped and attempted to silence the one person who could expose the truth. This is not just a case of family shame. This is a case of calculated fear, violence, and control. Gerald sat still, his lawyer arguing diminished intent. They called it a panic reaction, a misjudgment made in fear of public exposure. Emily was called to the stand on the third day. She looked directly at Gerald as she began. "He didn't just take me. He tried to erase me. But what he failed to understand is that truth doesn't die in silence, it waits." She spoke of the night he'd taken her, the threats, the psychological torment. But she also spoke of hope, how she fought to stay strong, to survive, and to be heard. The jury was visibly moved. In the hallway after her testimony, Harris met her with a nod. "That might have sealed it." "Let's hope," she replied. Meanwhile, Martin and a team of investigators were still unraveling the financial threads. In a shocking twist, they uncovered a hidden trust, millions stashed away, funneled into shell companies through decades of manipulation by the Whitmore family. The courtroom gasped when the evidence was presented. The legacy Gerald fought to preserve had been built on deception. As the days unfolded, Gerald's defense unraveled. Witnesses described his violent temper, his obsession with secrecy, his loathing for Lillian's past. One witness, a former groundskeeper, testified that Gerald had spoken of Emily months before she disappeared. He said she was a threat. Said she didn't know her place. Emily sat silently, fists clenched, jaw set. Her story wasn't just being told, it was being believed. With the trial reaching its midpoint, public interest soared. News crews camped outside the courthouse. Talk shows debated the meaning of legacy and privilege. The case had become more than a criminal proceeding, it was a national spectacle. Inside, the prosecution introduced one final witness, Lillian Whitmore. She entered the courtroom visibly aged by the scandal. Her hands trembled slightly as she took the stand. For the first few seconds, the courtroom held its breath. "I failed my daughter," she began, her voice low but steady. "I failed Emily. And I failed this town." She revealed the full story, her affair with a young artist decades ago, the pressure from her politically connected parents to keep it quiet, and the birth of a daughter she was told had died. She had only recently discovered the truth when the letters surfaced. "And Gerald?" the prosecutor asked. Lillian's eyes grew hard. "He knew. He always knew. He made sure I believed she was dead. He forged letters from the orphanage. And when he realized Emily might expose everything, he panicked." Gasps rippled through the room. Defense scrambled to discredit Lillian's testimony, claiming memory lapse, family bias, emotional instability. But the jury saw something else, a woman confessing her greatest regret with raw honesty. Later that day, Martin found Emily alone in a side hallway of the courthouse, looking out at the gathering storm clouds. "She told the truth," Emily whispered. Martin nodded. "And people heard it. That's all I ever wanted." Back in the courtroom, Gerald's expression had shifted. He no longer looked smug, he looked cornered. The prosecution rested. Closing arguments were set for the next morning. As the courtroom emptied, a soft rain began to fall. The air smelled of pine and wet pavement. Emily stepped into the drizzle, eyes closed, a single tear mixing with the raindrops. Tomorrow, the verdict would come. But tonight, she felt lighter. Like the weight of generations was finally lifting. The courtroom was silent as both legal teams prepared their final arguments. The jury sat expressionless, their notebooks full, their minds heavy. This wasn't just about Gerald Whitmore anymore, it was about the legacy of silence, power, and the cost of truth. The prosecutor stood, calm and deliberate. Emily Whitmore was not just a young woman trying to find her place, she was a threat to a carefully constructed lie. Gerald Whitmore used fear, force, and deception to try and erase her. But truth, as we've seen, has a way of surviving. He turned to the jury, voice rising slightly. "You've heard the testimonies. You've seen the letters. You've watched as the web of secrets unraveled, thread by thread. There is no justification, only guilt. Don't let the Whitmore name protect him any longer." The defense followed. They painted Gerald as a man of tradition, overwhelmed by a past he didn't create, trapped in the shadow of a powerful family. They begged for understanding, not forgiveness. But the room felt cold. The jury retired to deliberate. Hours passed. Emily, seated with Martin and Harris in the hallway, barely spoke. Her leg bounced involuntarily. Her fingers curled tightly around a folded tissue. Martin broke the silence. "You did everything right. Doesn't mean they'll convict him," she said, voice thin. Harris chimed in, "Sometimes the system works. You've already changed things." Just then, a court officer emerged. The jury's reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, as everyone filed into their seats, the weight was palpable. Gerald sat with his lawyer, staring forward, pale and stiff. Lillian gripped the bench in front of her. The foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Gerald Whitmore, guilty on all charges." Emily exhaled as if for the first time in years. There was no cheering, no applause, just stunned silence. Gerald didn't move. He didn't shout or argue. He simply slumped in his seat, as if the centuries of family secrets had finally crushed him. Outside, the storm had cleared. The sun broke through scattered clouds. And for the first time in her life, Emily Whitmore stepped into the light. Gerald's conviction made national headlines. The heiress who survived, bloodline on trial, and Whitmore dynasty crumbles, were plastered across every media outlet. But for Emily, none of it mattered as much as what came next. The sentencing hearing arrived a month later. The courtroom was again filled with press, supporters, skeptics, and survivors of the Whitmore family's manipulations. Emily sat in the front row, a quiet strength in her posture. Gerald was brought in, shackled and gaunt. The weight of prison life had already begun to show. He refused to look at Emily. When asked if he wished to speak before sentencing, Gerald stood and cleared his throat. His voice was dry. "I thought I was protecting my family's name. I thought legacy meant something more than truth. But I was wrong." He sat. No apology. Just a half-hearted confession, more about pride than remorse. The judge didn't flinch. "You've obstructed justice, falsified records, and nearly destroyed a life. All to protect a lie. This court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison." A murmur passed through the crowd. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Emily gave only one short statement. "This wasn't justice for me alone. It was justice for every secret that tried to stay buried. I hope this helps others speak up." Later that evening, she stood by her mother's grave, holding the same locket they had found in the woods. She placed a single white flower on the headstone. "I found the truth, Mom. Even if it cost everything." Lillian approached quietly from behind. "You gave this family something I never could, honesty." They stood together in silence as the sun dipped behind the trees. Meanwhile, back at the Millfield Police Department, Martin packed up Emily's case file, the word "closed" stamped across the top. But he knew some things never really closed. Some echoes lingered. Some scars never fully faded. Still, the town had changed. Whispers were replaced by voices. Secrets were replaced by stories. And Emily Whitmore had finally found her place in the world, not as a victim, but as its survivor. In the weeks following the trial, life in Millfield slowly began to settle back into an uneasy calm. The Whitmore estate, once a symbol of untouchable power, stood eerily quiet, its gates closed for the first time in decades. Townsfolk whispered about the downfall, but many were hesitant to speak openly. Some feared the remnants of the Whitmore influence still lingered. Emily, however, was busy rebuilding her life piece by piece. She moved into a modest apartment downtown, trading the shadows of her past for the bright, bustling streets she'd always observed from a distance. Her mornings were filled with coffee and cautious smiles exchanged with neighbors. Her evenings, with quiet reflection and journals filled with memories and questions. One afternoon, Martin stopped by unexpectedly. He carried a small box and wore a gentle smile. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, handing her the box carefully. Inside lay a collection of photographs and letters. Old, yellowed, and fragile. They were documents from his private investigation, the pieces that hadn't made it to the courtroom, moments he preserved for her. Emily's fingers trembled as she unfolded a letter signed by a man named James Caldwell, dated decades earlier. The words spoke of guilt, regret, and a promise to protect a child that had been hidden away. Martin watched her closely. "There are still questions, Emily. People who want answers. But sometimes, the past can only be understood a little at a time. She nodded. Thank you, Martin. For everything. For not giving up. As the sun dipped low outside, they sat quietly, two souls connected by the pursuit of truth, aware that some mysteries were not meant to be solved overnight, but unraveled with patience. Months later, Millfield had begun to heal, but the echoes of the past still lingered. Emily stood on the porch of her small apartment, watching the golden light fade behind the trees. The town she once feared now felt like home, imperfect but real. Detective Martin approached, carrying a worn notebook. Got something for you, he said, handing it over. Emily opened it carefully. Inside were notes, sketches, and names, fragments of other cold cases Martin had been quietly working on. You helped me find my story, she said softly. Maybe now it's my turn to help others find theirs. Martin smiled, a rare lightness in his eyes. I think you've earned that. Together, they talked late into the evening about justice, healing, and the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Emily realized that the true crime wasn't just about the darkness people hid, it was about the strength it took to face it. As the stars blinked awake, she whispered to herself, this isn't the end. It's a beginning. And with that, the last chapter of a long-hidden secret closed, while the promise of new stories, new truths, and new hope quietly opened.